Hello, I'm Amanda.
Hi, I'm Jordana.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
I am Neil.
I'm Hugh. I'm the visible guest for this broadcast.
And today we will be discussing The Invisible Guest by Oriol Paulo. A successful businessman wakes up next to his dead lover in a hotel room and he is charged for the murder. He hires a reputable lawyer to defend him and they work together to piece the story together in order to prove his innocence. All right, who wants to go first with the lever to list it? I'm really curious to what Jordana has to say. So I would like for her to go first, but if anyone is itching to go first, then by all means go for it.
So for me, I loved the ending because it was the only part of the movie that wasn't predictable. I thought the entire movie was unnecessary. There was no reason for them to actually murder this kid. I felt like they were just like, oh, we got in a car accident. I guess we're going to plot a murder now for no reason. It just didn't make sense to me.
It's funny that you say that because I never thought of it that way. Like, I never thought of it where it was like, oh, now that this kid is dead, let's just form this whole thing. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that because I had never thought of it like that.
All they did was get in a car accident and they were like, oh, instead of calling the police, let's plot a whole entire murder. And even though the kid, like we find out in the end, isn't dead, we're still going to go with it. Even though you could have easily gotten out of the situation. No one was to blame for the situation. A deer ran across the road. It's not like anyone was in trouble. They just didn't want their like wives and husbands to know that they were on a date or something, like having an affair. Like, it doesn't make sense.
But that's it. So it's like so the excuse is, or the plot point is that they don't want to get caught in their affair, and that snowballs out of control. But I completely agree that there's a gigantic imbalance. So like if it were like get caught having the affair or cover up a murder, I think most people, the reasonable thing to do is to just say, all right, we're gonna take the hit here.
But the thing is, they wouldn't even been like caught having an affair. They could have been like, oh, I got in an accident on my way to the airport or something like that. And they don't have to mention the other person that was there. It would have been easy to cover up.
I think for me, and what I initially thought as to why they did that was to enhance Adrian's character. Because at first we see him as the good guy who, didn't do anything wrong. And he tells Virginia, oh, Laura was the one that wanted to do all this stuff. Laura was the one that plotted everything. And so seeing that for the first half of the movie, when you're like, okay, we're trying to see if they can prove his innocence because he actually is innocent. I feel like for me, it added to his character above all. As far as the plot goes, obviously, I completely agree with you guys. But I think why I've never thought of it that way was because I had been focusing so much on his character.
Yeah, and I feel like technically we hear the same story like 3 different times. And so technically we could have just heard the true version and then we would have cut out, an hour's worth of film. But that's boring. Like, that's not fun. No one wants to just be like, so here's the story of these people that, put a guy in the lake and then had to try to cover it up. Like that's not like, it's the journey of getting there and the making you question everything and being like, make sure you're paying attention to the details. Like that's the fun part of it. If you cut that out, it seems unnecessary, but if you cut it out, there's not actually that much left.
I kind of question their decision to sort of have that real early on discussion of make sure you're paying attention to the details, because then I did. And I first off, like I was able to kind of somewhat before the big reveal at the end, figure out what, so like I was paying attention. Like when they showed the image of them on the wall as actors, I was like, they're actors. So there's something about this that we're supposed to know. And I couldn't quite make sense of it. But it would almost be like if you're did you ever see The Usual Suspects?
No, but that's actually one of my brother's favorite movies.
So Usual Suspects is very similar to this. And I don't want to give too much away, but like there are things that could have been said in that film. Make sure you pay attention to this. And if you did, you'd immediately know the big secret in the film. So it's an odd choice for them to kind of flag that early on, but at the same time, like, to be fair, like, I really didn't know what was going on until 5 minutes before the end. So I guess it kind of worked anyway.
Yeah. I remember in the very beginning, she puts her suitcase down in the elevator and there's like a really close-up shot on the suitcase. And I was like, that's got to be important.
Yeah.
Like they wouldn't do that if that wasn't something I'm supposed to remember. But then I didn't actually look at the initials, which then at the end are VG. And so you're like, oh my gosh, like that's the other woman. And so you realize in the end, like, oh, if I'd noticed the initials at the beginning, I would have realized they don't match her name and she's not who she says she is. But it wasn't until they show the suitcase again at the end that I was like, oh. And so I feel like that's the fun of it, is the second time through, you're realizing all of the details that you should have noticed before, but maybe noticed and didn't realize they were important.
Yep.
It's so funny that you guys are saying this because I've mentioned this before. I'm not very good at watching movies. So when I was watching it this last time around, I had forgotten half of the things that had happened. And so like the suitcase thing, Amanda, that you just mentioned, I just found that out this last time I watched it. The other like 3-4 times that I've watched this movie, as embarrassing it is to say, I didn't realize it. So
that's what's so good about it, though. And so Jack Reacher, I don't know if any of you have seen that movie. For the longest time, that was my favorite movie ever. I've seen it like way too many times. And that's the same sort of ideal where there's, there's a murder and somebody's being framed and you have to figure out the real story. And the more times you watch it, the more little clues you find along the way, and you'd never be able to notice them the first time. It's only by watching it a bunch of times that you're like, oh my God, that's right in the very beginning, and it gives the whole thing away, but you can't know that until the end. And that's my favorite part of these kinds of movies, is they told you at the beginning, you just didn't know that they told you.
Yeah, if you watch it again, everything is given away. You'll notice everything. So
I came up with a term for this a while ago. I call these spoiler films, like all one word. And spoiler films are films that if you say one sentence out loud to somebody who hasn't seen it, you'll ruin the entire film. So like The Sixth Sense is a spoiler film. This definitely is. I mean, there's a couple things you could say in this film that would retroactively ruin the entire plot for everybody. Can you imagine knowing, I mean, honest to God, like watching this for the first time and somebody said, oh, and by the way, Elvira and Virginia are the same person. Like if you knew that before you ever saw the film, it would be the worst. It would be torture to watch this film.
Yeah. I mean, would you even watch it at that point?
Yeah,
right? Because I feel like that's the whole point of the movie.
Right.
That's a good point.
The only good part of the movie. So if someone's giving that away, then there's nothing left. Because that was the only thing I didn't predict. Because everything else I was like, okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
I get the point. Okay, he's actually a bad guy. We saw this coming from the very beginning of the movie. And then they were like, actually, this woman is the wrong lady. Virginia is not who we think she is. And that was the only thing that actually like changed my opinion of the movie.
You guys seen Knives Out?
Yes.
Yeah,
so
I was kind of thinking about Knives Out a little bit while watching this.
That movie's so good.
Yeah. Well, is it not? So Knives Out is the perfected version of this.
Yes.
So if this has flaws, like Knives Out absolutely nails the genre, but the genre in that case is sort of like the Agatha Christie style detective whodunit, whereas this is a little different than that. This is more like a noir, locked room paradox. I mean, there's a lot of tawdry noir kind of action going on. It's not all like the detective's not kind of ever present. I mean, she's there and then she's gone for a whole big chunk of the film and then she's back. So it's like that, but yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, or I guess Knives Out reminds me of this. I don't know, but Knives Out absolutely completely nails that formula. It's maybe the best example ever made of that type of film. I don't know. I mean, there are other good ones, but
I think Knives Out in a way was really, really fun to watch. I think this movie, saying that it was fun to watch wouldn't be the right word to use. But I feel like with Knives Out, because they had so many characters and because all of the characters were so different and they had such interesting personalities to them, I think that's what, for me at least, what added to the film so much. So in a way, I do kind of wish, I don't know if I'd necessarily change anything about this movie, but I do in a way wish there could have been either an extra character in the mix or something that could have added more complexity to this that could have allowed more potential to think of other outcomes of this movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this film's also completely humorless, Whereas
Yeah.
Knives Out's really funny. So.
Yeah.
A part of me wishes like Inspector Milan had more of a role in the film. You know, it's like you don't really see much of him, but they're always on the phone talking to him.
Hmm.
So it's like I feel like if he threw in a little twist, other than just saying like, "Oh, we got the conductor, we figured out who the driver is, like he can help us." Other than that, I felt like he was unnecessary to the movie, and I wish we got more of him.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie is kind of like an escape room. Like you watch it once and it's like, that was pretty fun, and then you can't really watch. I mean, you could watch it again if you really liked it. Like I thought it was pretty good, but like I don't know if I would watch it again because now
Right.
I know everything about it, and there wasn't a whole lot in it where I was like, I want to come back for that, you know?
Hmm.
Because like a lot of movies, even like the best, like watching Knives Out, it's like I'll come back to that because that's
Yeah.
like a really fun movie to watch. But I don't know if there's really much to come back to with this one.
Yeah, and a spoiler film you should want to watch twice. So like Sixth Sense, you absolutely immediately want to watch it the second time. Usual Suspects, same thing. Whereas I think this one, it's a little more, it's more intricate, and at the same time, it feels more thin in terms of like, maybe it's thin on character. I mean, frankly, because like if you think about it, like even like I think we know Adrian like fairly well, Laura somewhat well, Virginia Goodman not so well. Like I mean, she's an important role in the film, but she's not somebody whose character is developed that much. Elvira has zero character. It's like she doesn't exist, and then she's the most important character in the film. Maybe Tomas has the most character, but they're not. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like a character study at all, and I think that's maybe to its detriment a little bit.
I think my only issue with Elvira was when Tomas was in the car with Laura and he said, "Oh, once my wife got cancer, we moved out here." I feel like they could have done a lot with not just the cancer, but the fact that the wife's role in his life had a lot to do with why he was doing what he was doing for his son. Does that make sense? So I feel like he was always, like, I'm trying to figure out what happened to my son. We're trying to figure out what happened to him. But I do wish that Elvira could have had a bigger play in that, only because I feel like they could have also added to her character with interacting with Adrian, if that makes sense. Like it could have been a lot more depth.
Did I hear somebody say the son was alive the whole time?
Yes.
What does that mean? Is that true?
He was in, so I'm pretty sure in the final wasn't he alive in the trunk? And then he pushes, it's not until he pushes the car into the water.
Oh, got it.
He drowned. Yeah, so he was, when Adrian was about to push the car in the lake, he heard like a pounding on the trunk, and then he realized that he was alive, but he was pretty much close to dead. Like they didn't make it seem like he was like, "Oh, like I'm alive," They made it seem as though like, "Oh, you've been hanging on by a thread this whole time."
Which that bothered me though, because at one point we were going, I don't remember at what point, but there was one point where I was like, what if he wasn't actually dead? Like, I don't know. I had the thought, but then I was like, no, because he's in the passenger seat for so long, and then they knock him over and he's laying there and he's dripping blood all over the ground. I was like, there was no way that they thought he was dead and he wasn't, because I kept thinking he was going to like appear and come back. And I was like, no, he's got to be dead. And they were like, he wasn't dead. And I was like, are you kidding?
But they never checked him, like his heart rate or anything. They're just like, oh no, he's dead just by staring at him. And I'm like,
I feel like that's fine though, because they're kind of dumb. Like I feel like kind of the point of it is that like the Adrian and Laura are both they've just majorly messed up in every single way. It's just like watching a train wreck. Like if you've ever seen the movie Good Time, like the main character is an idiot and he does like the dumbest things ever, but that doesn't make the movie dumb. That's just who he is. I feel like who they are dumb rich people who don't know what the hell they're doing, and they just completely mess up everything. That's kind of how I watched it. So I saw some people complaining about how like it makes no sense that they wouldn't think, or that they would think he was dead. And I'm like, I don't know. If you're like them, I feel like that was kind of the point, is that they were not very attentive.
But he's not, just to be really clear, in the end, he drowns.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just that he's alive in the trunk for a really long time when the car's going down. Okay, I got it.
I think for me, and why although it bothered me, yes, I completely agree. I think for me and why I understand the necessity of it being in there was because it was a very good revelation of Adrian's character. Like that was the minute when we realized, like, holy crap, this guy is clearly an absolute horrible human being. Especially with the music, like the sound effect, and considering that, I mean, we didn't know it at the time, or you guys didn't know it at the time, but her reaction once he says that he was alive was very telling, even though the viewer didn't know it at the time. So I think although I can see how it can be problematic and how it can bother people, I completely understand as to why they put it in.
I guess my thing, I just felt like I was like, we already knew he was a terrible person. Like I already kind of, and I feel like part of it was, this whole theme is like these rich people and the extent that they'll go to protect themselves and all of this. And I feel like maybe they just didn't make me like Adrian enough in the beginning that I didn't like have that revelation of like, oh my, like from the beginning, I was like, both of these people are trash human beings. Like maybe even when I thought that Lara was like making him do it, I was never like, oh, poor Adrian. Like you pushed a
Yeah.
car with a dead body into a lake. Like that, I don't know. So I feel like it wasn't that, like it wasn't like he went from being an angel to being a terrible murderer for me. And so I was like, I feel like that revelation wasn't completely necessary, but I do get what the point of it was.
I completely agree, because if they had added in the fact that, oh, instead of going straight to a lake, he checked on the kid in the trunk, and he like did something kind, it was like, oh, I'm so sorry, as he's pushing the car into the lake, I would have been like, okay, he seems to be a decent person, is forced to be doing this, but they're just like, oh no, he pushed it into the lake. I was like, okay, you expect me to feel bad for him?
I just want to talk about the title of the movie.
Yes.
Because so in English it's The Invisible Guest. In Spanish it's Contratiempo, which is a setback, but also like literal translation is against time. And that's such a genius title because like they say Contratiempo like 8 different times throughout the movie. Like they keep calling things setbacks, and like there's this idea that, to Lara and to Adrian, that this is just a setback for them and that they'll get past it. And so I think that's genius. And then they're also working against time. They literally have a timer on the table that's ticking the whole time. And so I was like, that's such a smart title. And then they make it The Invisible Guest, which is like such a small part of the movie. And I was so frustrated by that.
There's a movie called The Invisible Ghost, this old Bela Lugosi movie. I mean, the American title sounds like some old 40s terrible B movie. I mean, Invisible Guest is a really bad name. Contratiempo, like what it means is against time, but it also means like doesn't it sort of mean a recursion? Like a sort of turning back, and the film keeps doing that, right? So it keeps showing you what happened in the past in different versions. So it's really smart in that way. But why is that stopwatch on the table in the first place? I couldn't figure that out.
So her whole point was that someone's going to be on the stand within a certain amount of time, and they think that that's the driver that drove by. So the reason why Elvira is like, I'm on a timestamp, is obviously because she knows when the real Virginia Goodman's going to come, because in the beginning he's like, you're early. So then he's like, okay, let's keep working with this. And he thinks that they're on a timestamp on a time crunch because they're about to question this guy who was the only witness that was there. So there were 2 different scenarios as to why each of them were fighting time.
It's very, I mean, the first 15 minutes, like the exposition, like you're getting so much talk. Like it's the exact opposite of like show don't tell. Like you're getting a ton of talk. And this is an interesting thing too. I think it would be kind of a cool film as a test case for viewers, because like I tend to relate to movies purely visually. I can't remember names. I can't remember like heavy exposition. It just goes in one ear and out the other. What I remember is like what I see. And this film it takes a while for the visual elements to get up and running. And so I think this is going to be like, for certain viewers, this is going to be a tough pill. The first, I'd say 10 minutes or so. But then if you watch it a second time, all that stuff just drops into place, makes perfect sense.
I feel like that might have been why it was so hard for me to enjoy this movie, because I am a visual person. I do like to watch the movie, not hear a lot of the conversation. And then this was just like, we're having a conversation and I will keep talking at you and then show what actually was going on.
Yep. I wanted to say that I thought that the process shots, they were just digitized CGI shots at the end when they show the Doritos across the way in the little window, just looked absolutely horrible. Like I think
That's what my brother said.
just visually it just looked completely phony and bad because it's a key shot, you know.
I thought Adrian was a CGI person when he first showed up. For a second, I was like, you look like you got de-aged using like CGI. Like, I don't know if that's just like how like smooth his face was or something.
I mean, there's a different version of this ending where you could easily imagine like Adrian goes to jail. You know, he goes to jail, or something happens that makes it absolutely clear that his fate is sealed. And then we don't even see him seeing the revelation of Elvira or anything like that. We just see, weirdly, we would see Garrido and Virginia Goodman meet, and then she pulls off the mask and just sort of says, okay, it's taken care of. And at that point, like, they just walk off into the sunset together, knowing that they won, and he has no idea what happened to him. And I think that's kind of another interesting way to,
Yeah.
you know.
And in a way, I feel like that would almost be better closure, right? Like where Adrian was hiding everything from them and Adrian was hiding everything from everyone. So it's only appropriate that they do the same to him and he's the one in jail. So from what really tied me to the movie was the scene where Virginia or Elvira was explaining to him that Laura got really sick because of how guilty she felt. And like when she was pulling out her hair and that's why she had changed her hair. I liked that moment only because it like that flip on the characters and once you realize kind of what's happening with Laura and Adrian's dynamic here, I enjoyed that only because I feel like that added to not only their characters, but what Elvira was talking about in that moment. Like I feel like what she was talking about wouldn't have been as what's that word? Impact or not impactful. What's that word? I know from class now, Hugh. I know to not use that word. What did you say, Jordana?
Momentous.
Yeah, like you know what I mean? So I feel like for me it was almost like another grab of engagement for me as a viewer, but of course that's just me watching. So I'm sure that other people, I mean some people could have hated that, you know.
I agree with that. I liked how it flipped everything kind of upside down because like you watch the whole thing, you don't really. I didn't think about that angle that he was actually like some like he was like the mastermind behind it. I didn't think she was either. So I agreed with you on that.
I just felt like we didn't get enough of her for her to just show this evil side automatically and have the guy as the victim, like have Adrian as a victim in this scenario. I was like, okay, this just seems off. Like this entire story that you're trying to put out right now, it just seems like something's missing.
Yeah, and I feel like it's supposed to feel that way. It's just that you don't know why. Like you're like, something's wrong. I just don't know what it is yet. And it's not until you get all the way to the end that you're like, oh, because the whole thing was wrong.
I don't know if you guys noticed, but the entire like beginning of the film, like during Adrian's story, the lighting was darker. Like all of the editing for the lighting was darker, but at the end it all got bright during the like final story.
Oh. I really noticed that it was dim early on, but I didn't realize, I guess it sort of gradually brightened up, which is a pretty interesting little metaphorical use of lighting because the film sort of everything becomes illuminated at the end of the film plot wise. I mean, it's sort of like, it's not an homage to film noir, but they're playing with form in terms of like camera style, lighting design, color palette, which is very kind of like washed out and kind of muted tones. And the whole thing seems pretty grim. Like, I think that's good. Like, it seems like a tawdry film about bad people who are badly motivated. And I think I kind of love I mean, you know, obviously there's a whole audience share that loves watching films like that. I love watching films like that. I almost wish they were a little more bad. I think the best moment for me, frankly, is when he reveals that he knew the guy was alive in the trunk. Like to me, that's the highlight of the whole film.
Because I thought that was a scene that we could have completely cut out, and that was your favorite part of the movie. But because I felt like he was already kind of a jerk, and I didn't think that really added that much to his character. But I guess it does kind of draw the line between like accidental murder and intentional murder, which does make make a bit of a difference.
And it
I
just
think
shows like how far he slipped. So like they start out with this thing that's almost a nothing. You know, the deer runs out in front of the car. So it's almost like a pure accident. And he gets so caught up in his own machinations that he just decides, well, okay, gonna push him in. It's like, so here's something I have to say about this. So this film does all sorts of homage to Hitchcock. So like the blonde haired woman walking through a hotel at the beginning of the film, I mean, that's like straight out of Vertigo, and a whole series of Hitchcockian blondes sort of doing interesting, complicated things in the narratives. So I think there's that. There's the pushing of the car into the lake, which is straight out of Psycho. You know, Norman Bates pushes the car with Marion in the trunk into the swamp out in back of the Bates Motel. And one thing about that, and I would say this across the board, and the Rear Window sequences that I mentioned, which I think are really badly done, but it looks like Rear Window, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's an homage to Hitchcock. But when the car is being pushed into the lake, like in this film, he just pushes the car into the lake and the car goes down, and that's it. And what happens in Psycho is he pushes the car out and it kind of floats out and it's going blub, 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 and then it stops. And then there's this gigantic pause where you look at Norman, and Norman's like looking around like, holy shit, like what do I do? And then it starts to lower again. So it's this perfect moment of suspense. And this film doesn't do that at all. And I just thought, okay, so that's kind of where this film is. It's kind of doing like weak Hitchcock, WEAK, like it's kind of doing a weakened version or kind of watered down version of what Hitchcock does, with the one exception that we find out later that he's alive in the trunk. Like we never find out that Marion was actually alive. Of course, she's been stabbed to death, but like we find out that he's alive in the trunk. And I think that's a pretty cool, that's why I like it so much. It kind of redeems that dumb moment with the car going down so easily in the water. And you know, there's another film, if you're at all interested in seeing it, called Raising Cain, this Brian De Palma film, who, you know, in this film, like he does a take on the car sinking into the swamp. And what happens there is we see the person in the car as it's going down. So they're not in the trunk, they're in the back seat, and they're dead. And they're going down. And just as the car is about to submerge, they come alive, and then they start thrashing around in the car, and the car goes down and they drown. And it's just I mean, that's how De Palma is. Like he takes Hitchcock and cranks him up to 15. And it's just the most unhinged, insane take on Hitchcock there is. But every De Palma film's like that. Honestly, this is something we need to talk about. But I think this film might be a really good, terrible film.
I think I have to agree with you on that. It's a good, terrible film.
Like it's a film that's not, it's unapologetic. It's doing what it's doing, and it just doesn't, you know, it's going to like manipulate you hard. And I think it's not a subtle film in any way, shape, or form, right?
The opening scene when they're like in the hotel and he's like, he puts on that coat. I was just thinking like, that's a really nice coat.
He's
like,
a rich businessman.
That
a
with
lot of
like
money.
with like the black turtleneck, I was just like, this is great. This is good outfit. Like, I'm like, he's dressed impeccably for this horrible thing to happen to him.
See, that's just the Spanish influence.
I was really, as someone from America, my perspective, I was really bothered by the driver who showed up. I was like, this guy does not give up. Like, why does he care so much when he comes up to this crime scene? Because I was training a guy at work once because I do deliveries. So I was training him. We were driving down, and some guy comes out of a street and he gets T-boned by a semi. Just
Knock on wood.
completely smacked. It was pretty bad. And this guy in front of us, he just goes and drives away. And I was like, all right, man, like I'll see you later. And I was just like, that's not how it goes. Like this guy, he was just like, are you sure you don't need anything? Like he was like very like suspicious the whole time. And I was like, what is this guy's deal?
It could be that. I feel like part of it though, they looked so suspicious. Like in that scene, like that was kind of when we were doing like memeable moment. Like if we were gonna pick a shot, like that was the typical like act natural. She's like, okay, come stand here, and you're gonna stand across from me, and I'm gonna hold this little book, and we're gonna pretend that I'm right. And I was like, what? Like, it's such a parody of like, we're gonna do this interaction and we're gonna look normal, but we just killed a man, but this is gonna be fine. No one's gonna question us. And like, it's so obvious. Like, they look, and he looks so scared. And the guy in the car is looking at him like, are you okay? Like, is this woman holding you hostage? And it's so funny. That spot is so funny.
It's like 3 different memes. It's like the sus as a as a slang phrase, and also that whole "don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious," and that's what this whole first act of this film is. That
It's so good.
Yeah.
That scene's supposed to be this big dramatic reveal. Like, anytime somebody like is posing as someone else and they pull off the mask, but I always just think of like Mrs. Doubtfire and all of these parts where like his face is like melting off, and so
Or Big Mama.
I can never take them seriously whenever people are just pulling faces off. It's just always so absurd to me.
But in this film, like it's like a skin peel. Like she just goes whoosh.
Whenever I see someone like peeling off those face masks, I think of it as like a long day of just lying to everyone. Like a long day of trying to smile or something like that.
It's actually an interesting thing about this film is that Adrian is famous, right? So he won the, what's it called? The European Businessman Award, which just can't possibly exist in reality. But
I think it probably does.
The European Businessman of the Year. It's
Probably
just a
something
weird.
like that.
It's honestly amazing what kinds of accolades and awards there are out
Sure.
there.
But
you
like I could
know?
see like European CEO of the year, I could see, but just like businessman. Like what? It's so
That's
odd.
funny.
It's a thing.
It is.
It is?
The business
Oh my
person of
gosh.
the year, the European businessman, it is a thing.
So he wins that award, and his face is broadcast all over the country, or all over Europe, and thus his sort of murderous subplot, or his murderous life gets cast out into the open, which I think is an interesting aspect of this film. But actually, that's the one that I'm sort of arguing is skippable. Like public notoriety is not that big of a.
I kind of like that scene because I think it gives you the first look into how he actually is, because when they're taking Thomas away in the car, and his wife is like, "Do you know who that is?" And he's like,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
and he takes a minute and he's just like, "Nope."
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then it's like, man, okay, maybe he is kind of more sinister than we think. That's what I thought when I saw that. So I kind of liked it for that reason.
Yeah.
It also has the greatest match cut in the whole movie,
Huh.
where he flicks the lighter into the water.
That's my
Oh,
moment.
yeah.
Because I feel like that lighter holds so much symbolism in this movie.
Yeah.
Because first we see it obviously when she lights the cigarette when she's waiting for the car. I mean for the AAA. I don't know what it is in Spain, but for AAA. And then once Tomas is fixing her car, he notices that lighter. And I just
Right.
feel like that lighter is like the one telling object of their guilt and their mistake. Like that's the one thing where everyone can stare at it and just be like, that's it. Because when he throws it in the water and Victoria or Elvira explains to him like that was your reveal that you had done something wrong. But yeah. I think my skippable scene was the cancer. I don't necessarily think it was super necessary for his wife to have cancer. I think that was just, I don't know if it was to make people sad, but it didn't add to the plot at all. At
Yeah,
all.
They could have like given her motivation to like do all that convoluted
But
stuff
she's a
in the first
mom.
place, but they don't ever say that. Like
I think her being a mom alone is enough motivation, like
it
when
is,
you're
yeah.
a parent and your kid is in any sort of danger or whatnot, you will literally do whatever it takes, whether that be even losing who you are as a person. So I feel like that it was just so unnecessary to me.
So what are Tomas and Elvira guilty of in the end? Nothing.
Nothing.
Not a damn thing.
I think that was the point. I think the whole point was for them to figure out what happened in the most raw way possible, was to just go through all of the effed up, you know what I mean? Like all that stuff to where you have to find out all of that all of the dirty stuff in order to get them. Because at that point,
Yeah.
when you're just a random person going up against someone who's famous and
Yep.
someone who could afford arguably the best lawyers. Obviously, Virginia Goodman's super reputable and has a really good reputation. So I feel like when you know what you're up against, and clearly Tomas the entire time, the film portrays him as someone who is smart.
And that was, at the beginning, I had reservations about her because when he was just spilling his guts and just telling her his whole story, I had the thought of like, I didn't obviously never thought that she was the mom, but I thought that maybe she was going to somehow turn out to not be actually on his side somehow, because I was like, who just, tells their whole life story and admits to murder to some random stranger you've never met without like the lawyer being there to be like, okay, this is this woman I hired, you can trust her. And so I
That's
don't
true.
know. I think that, and that's the whole point though, is like, she had to be this mysterious woman. Like, Felix had to be off on the other, like couldn't get there in time, or else it never would have worked because somebody would have figured out she wasn't who she said she was.
One thing I want to hit on before we get past Virginia and sort of her interactions with Adrian is and I should have brought this up with, I don't know if this is skippable or sort of a list that it's all those things combined, is something that's almost so offensively dumb to me that the film does that, like, I want to run this by you all as a test because maybe this is an age thing, but when she says, have you ever heard the story of the guy who hung himself in a barn and nobody can figure out how he did it? His feet are 10 inches off the ground. He's suspended 10 feet from the beam. There's nothing anywhere around him and nobody can figure out. All the doors are locked. Nobody can figure out. So it's her example of the locked room paradox. And then she says, and here's how he did it. He was standing on a block of ice. The block of ice melted and he asphyxiated and died. The reason I find this so problematic is that the example she comes up with of a locked room paradox is the classic example of a locked room paradox that everybody already knows. So she tells him this story as though nobody's ever heard the story of the guy who was standing on the block of ice and hung himself. And so I'm like, I can see that the plot's going in the direction of her revealing some sort of really crafty example of what this means and like why it's important, and then she gives us the dumbest possible example, and I was really bummed out by that, like to the point that I don't want to say I almost like turned the film off, but I was just really not happy at all when that's what she came up with, and I can't even think of like what an equivalent to that would be. It's sort of like, if genres have these cliches, that's the biggest cliche. And that's the thing that she used to explain her thinking to him. Ugh.
I definitely don't think it's an age thing because my brother's 23 and he said the same thing.
So he said block of ice.
Well, he was just like,
Yeah.
just like, if you're having a movie that has such potential to create such mystery, then why would you use something that is so universal? Why not use something that is only applicable to this film? Why not use something that has some kind of individuality that will tie itself to the film itself?
Totally.
As opposed to having some kind of paradox that is universal and everyone knows about, to where, when you think of this paradox, you're not going to think of the movie first.
So the writers should have come up with their own version of a locked room paradox and had her explain that to him. And then we'd all go, oh, wow, that's like really cool. But instead,
I also think it's a personality thing, though, because my brother and I had this conversation because he was like where you are. He was like, what was that? Whereas for me, and why I don't think it's an age thing, was because I don't think I have watched enough films or read enough books, because he reads and watches so many films and reads so many books. So I think his palette is a lot broader than mine as with those kinds of things. So I think for me, and as why it didn't bother me as much, was because I just simply had never heard of it before the first time I'd watched the movie.
So here's what I want to kind of toss out and just see what you think. I think what this film is, I'll be very honest, is it's sort of like a beginner's classical detective whodunit noir mystery. Like, so I think this is sort of like you're getting in, you're sort of taking baby steps in, or, people talk about like starter homes. Like this is a starter classical detective whodunit, and this is the one where you decide whether this is a genre that you like or not, and then you graduate up to the more sophisticated. So like Usual Suspects would be another step up. Knives Out kind of is another step up. And there's a rich history of these films, but there are many versions of this that are better than this one. And I think to me this is sort of like it's good enough to sort of get those juices going, but it's not in the end. Like if you watch if you watched Usual Suspects and then revisited this, you would think this was like child's play.
So if we think of the big reveal not as that Elvira and Victoria are the same person, but if we think of the big reveal being like what we figured out, the final plot of this whole thing, like who actually killed Laura in the hotel room, it ends up being what you thought it was in the first place. Like we start off thinking like Adrian's in the hotel room, he kills Laura to cover something up, and then he like that's where it starts, and then he's like, no, I'm gonna explain it a different way, and we're gonna go through this whole thing to prove. And then in the end, that actually is what happened. He went to the hotel room to kill her, and he wasn't covering up the affair, but he was covering up something else. But in the end, it ends where it starts. Like I feel like if it was really gonna be next level, there would have been all of a sudden something else comes in at the end, and it's some other third, like I kept waiting for the mystery third party to come in that was going to be like, oh, just kidding, actually, you know, the guy that drove by in the car came back and he did something, or somebody else came back, and like it never. I feel like if you wanted to elevate it, you would bring in some new element that we didn't see coming.
Well, it is, you've almost convinced me though that the film is smarter than I think it is, because like he lies by telling the truth in a sense. Like like what we take to be the case in the end is in fact the case, which I think is pretty smart. But yeah, I mean, I think like in some ways, like this guy, like we get sucked into his own thinking about it, and the film just takes us on this journey through his psychology, and that, you know, it's very odd to me that in the end, the person who is involved in the big reveal, like this is not the case in Usual Suspects. The person involved in the big reveal at the end of the film isn't a person who's involved with the crime. It's the investigator. So like what? So the big twist is that the person investigating this is not who we thought they were. That's really strange. I mean, I kind of like it, but it's just not how this is supposed to go in some way.
I think going off of Amanda's point, I completely agree, especially with the witness. Like, I feel like the potential there could have been so endless, considering that, one, there were two different sides of the story, right? So first we heard Adrian saying that he drove by, he saw us, he seemed suspicious, I'm worried about him. And then we see that he might have been there when Adrian pushed the car in the lake, but we still never found out. You know what I mean? So I feel like there could have been so much more complexity to the plot if they used what we were already given. Like he was already there. It's not like, you know, if you add anything else, you're gonna have to take him out. He's already there. You might as well give us more. And I'm honestly really happy that you guys have these feelings about these movies, because now I'm realizing, I'm like, oh, now I understand what my brother was like. My brother was like, this is the one movie that you tell everyone to watch. You have to change it. You have to change it. And I was like, no, I don't. It's a really good movie. And he was like, well, hopefully this discussion makes you realize. And he was so right. He's standing outside my door right now. I know the first thing he's going to ask me when I go outside is going to be like, I was right, right? And he always says that. It's like, but I'm really happy this is happening.
I
feel like you shouldn't dislike it because other people have problems with it. Like, if you like it, you like it. I mean,
but
I like a lot of movies. Like, some of my favorite movies are movies that I'm sure a lot of people really don't like, but I love them either way. And, you know.
But I think my problem is that I watch the same movie over and over and over again, so I don't have anyone to tell me as to why it may not be as good as I think it is. Like the one movie that I will not budge on is the Pink Panther. Okay, like I understand why everyone thinks that's a horrible movie. That is still one of my favorite movies. But I think the reason why I'm saying this with this movie is because I hadn't looked at it, like especially what Jordana said. I hadn't looked at it that way. Like in the beginning of this conversation, I had never looked at it that way. I was so fixated on the characters themselves as opposed to the plot with the characters.
Wait, you're talking about the Steve Martin Pink Panther?
Yes, it's so funny.
Oh my God.
I know, my brother, trust me.
Have you watched the Peter Sellers Pink Panthers?
No, my dad asked. Okay, this is like, I wish my family could see this right now because they would feel so happy. No, my dad told me the same thing. He was like, "Have you even seen the original Pink Panther? Do you even know where it comes from?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Well, educate yourself." I'm like, "But this is such a good movie." And my brother was like, "That's literally the shittiest movie that I have ever seen. And you're the only person on this earth that think that's a good movie." I'm like, "Okay, you bring someone in front of that movie and you tell me that they're not going to laugh their butt off. It's hilarious, but I understand that it's really bad. I get it. I get it. I will not budge. I
No,
will not budge.
that's a
It's so
perfectly
good."
viable way. That's a perfectly viable thing to say because
I agree.
I have a, like guilty pleasure is the Willy Wonka remake. The original movie is
God.
amazing.
Oh,
The original movie
God.
is
Oh,
like a
God.
really really good movie, but
That makes me feel better.
The Tim Burton one is just like wow. Like sometimes you watch it and you're like, this is horrendous, but I also can't take my eyes off it.
Okay, that's true. That's
Well, here's
true.
another. I'll and to speak to sort of go to Neil's point. Like I think this is a little more philosophical angle on like viewership and what it means to be kind of a naive viewer. But like I think what we should strive to be in some ways, like I think in Screen 101 we talk about like being a critical viewer and kind of picking apart films and analyzing them. And I think all that's completely valid. But if you're watching a film for like entertainment's sake, I think you should actually strive to be as naive as possible. Like I think you should really like be like disavow everything, kind of turn off your thinking critical brain and try to get completely absorbed and let the film take you where it wants you to go. And if you can achieve that, it's almost like some sort of Zen state. But like if you can achieve this sense where like every film and any film is like potentially something that you could go on that ride, that's actually where you should be. I think picking apart film, like if the goal is to be entertained, you should absolutely not be picking apart every last little weird detail or comparing, for instance, the old Willy Wonka to the new Willy Wonka. Like they're just both different films and you could be entertained by either one. And I think that that's a different way to approach things. But people who endlessly grouse about like continuity errors, logical flaws in plot, all that stuff, those people are just insufferable. I mean, those are like bad people. I really mean it. Like, I just think like you can't constantly like, there's a sense in which like film wants you to be entertained. You need to want to be entertained by film in order for that to happen. So why constantly like fight that? Just like you wouldn't go on a roller coaster and like complain about like that the first curve wasn't severe enough or something. It just
so
doesn't make sense.
funny. That's such a good analogy.
I think there's sometimes where it is kind of important to criticize it that way though. Sometimes when it is like I totally agree about like sometimes you should just be entertained, like just enjoy it as it is. Like I think that way about like 80s action movies. Like I really like Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's
great.
like dumb Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie.
Arnold
And like
Schwarzenegger. I
any
haven't
like
heard that
problems
name.
with it like really aren't that important. But I feel like there's other things where like if you're talking about one of my big ones, I'm not going to start on it now, but if you caught me and asked me about it, I would talk to you about it for hours. But it's the new Star Wars movies. Those, I think it gets to a point where it's like kind of important to talk about those problems because they're so big and they're so dumb that it gets in the way, and it's kind of disrespectful in a way.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a problem. But then there's some other ones where it's like, I feel like with the Pink Panther movie, Ashley, like there's probably like some people who are like really into comedy who are like, this doesn't work on a comedic level at all. But if you find it funny, you find it funny. And
Right.
you shouldn't waste your time being like, a Debbie Downer about it all the time,
It's super ironic that you say that because I don't like comedy. I don't like comedy movies. And it's not, I like laughing. I like funny things. It's not like I'm boring or whatever. At least I don't think so. But it's just that I don't like forced humor. And I think that's why I don't like comedy. But there's just something about that movie where I don't know what it is. I get so happy even thinking about it because it's so stupid. I mean, the stupidity, I think the best way I describe it is it's really smart stupidity.
Yeah.
It's
I think
just
that
funny.
like you got to also admit that like what makes people laugh. Like first off, there's no accounting for what makes any individual person laugh, but that the hierarchy of like what the funniest stuff in the world is sort of like movies are way down the list. So like at the top of the list would be like America's Funniest Home Videos. Like, what makes you laugh the hardest? Like people actually falling. Like that's way at the top of the list. Like some stand-up, like certain stand-up comedians. Like I went to see Seinfeld, whatever you think of Seinfeld. I went to see Seinfeld downtown in Worcester a couple of years ago, and my face hurt. I was laughing so hard. I laughed nonstop for an hour and 30 minutes, right? And so I think stand-up comedy is way up there. I think like Vines, like really good
Oh my
Vines
gosh.
are just like some TikToks are side-splittingly hilarious. But then movies, like the funny comedy movie, like even the funniest comedy movie makes me laugh like occasionally. Like I would even put TV, like like 30 Rock, I would put way above. The Office, I would put way above the average comedy movie. Comedy movies just, I agree. I think it's kind of like, it doesn't work that well. Like I think the format doesn't work well, like a 2-hour format. And even like, if you think about like a Will Ferrell, like a really funny Will Ferrell movie, those films are uniformly terrible in the third act because they get really sentimental and they want you to take these characters seriously. And it's just like, I don't want to take these characters. Like 30 Rock doesn't take its characters seriously. Like, why do we have to do that? And so I think it's like almost a failed, it's a mismatch of goal, which is to make you laugh, and format. And I don't think they go together. I totally agree with what you're saying.
I think the hardest part that like the hardest obstacle that film has to get over is that it's both an art and a form of entertainment.
Yes.
And like the roller coaster example, it's just entertainment. No one critiques roller coasters. And like pure art, like if you had like, you know, a classical painting on the wall, like you can critique a painting, but you're not expected to like really be entertained. You're not going to like laugh and like spend hours looking at the painting. You just look at it and appreciate it. Whereas film kind of tries to do both. And there's like films that like are really more art films. Like, you know, you'll have like, I don't know what to example to throw out, but there'll be like specific films that you're like, okay, this isn't really a movie I watch because I'm like looking for a good time on a Friday night. This is a film that I watch to analyze and like really appreciate its form. And then there's films that are really just for fun, like the Pink Panther movie or Willy Wonka, that you're not going to think critically about the choices they make. You're just there to enjoy it. And it's when they try to do both, like when they try to be funny and have that sentimentality, that's where it breaks down. And so I feel like every film is just constantly battling of like, how do we be both? And you can't really win.
That reminds me of, I just recently watched Little Women. It's my brother's girlfriend's favorite movie right
Which
now.
version?
The 2019 one with Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah, I saw that one on the green.
Well, so
Back in another life, right?
I mean, I like when you say that some movies are meant to be art, like that was the first thing that came to mind, only because when I was watching it, first of all, I was crying basically the whole time because that ish was sad. And second of all, it was beautiful. I mean, I think the elegance of the idea that there's sisters and there's family involved and love and all this stuff. The entire time I kept looking over, I was like, this is beautiful. Like the scenery was beautiful. I was like, where was this filmed? I have to find out where this was filmed. It was filmed in Massachusetts.
100% in Massachusetts, I believe.
Yeah.
One of my friends was an extra.
It's just
Really?
beautiful.
My sister's boyfriend was an extra.
Really? Wow.
I'm pretty sure it was for Little Women. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it must have been for Little Women, I think. Yeah.
And Amanda, you said your friend was?
Yeah, they just,
That's
I don't know
so
how he
cool.
found it, but they just had like, they're like, anyone that's going to be in Massachusetts, like if you look enough like you could have belonged in that time period, we'll shove you in the background. So
That's so crazy.
yeah.
But yeah, that was like one of the first times I watched a movie, and I was like, I understand now how a movie can, within its entirety, be art. I think for me, it's really difficult because I grew up going to art museums and I grew up looking at portraits and paintings and whatnot. And so everything was stationary, everything was just in front of me, whereas obviously a film, there's so much movement and it's very it's progressive over time. So it was one of the first times in my life where I finally understood why a movie could be a piece of art. I mean, it was
What
amazing.
about, well, this takes us way far afield, but like, what about films that are works of art that don't exist to entertain you in any. So I don't know that they don't exist to entertain you in any way, but they actually they feel like you know how some abstract art feels almost like it intends to hurt you, like it intends to disturb you deeply. I mean, there are films like that. I think David Lynch is like that. Like if you watch a David Lynch film, like it's interesting and you're along for the ride, but at the same time, like he's doing things that like really hit deeply psychologically to really pull the rug out from under you as a viewer and upset you.
I think in those situations, it's all about intention. So obviously, if you're giving it to the wrong audience, they're going to hate the movie. But to those who are looking for that, and to those who seek art like that, I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of the same thing where someone could look at a painting with just a black circle on it and think, how is this art? When other people can look at it and be like, that is genius. And I'm one of those people who are like, how can a black circle be art? But I understand it. And it's all about interpretation, right? So someone could think of it as a black circle. Another person could think of it as an Oreo.
You know, and there are people who think Spring Breakers is an absolute top class genius work of art.
I've never
I mean it.
Yet to see it.
So like I think there's a claim to be made there. Like I think it's a legitimately interesting film in a lot of provocative ways. I have a good one. You want me to say it? So this is IMDb reviewer Donkey Braids, who said, in my opinion, this film doesn't even deserve a 1. It deserves a -1. It deserves less than a -1. This is not a good film. This is not a good thriller. In fact, this is not a thriller at all. Anyone who talks about the plot twist, I won't spoil it, must be blind. I knew this supposed plot twist as soon as a certain scene came on. There's nothing surprising or thrilling about this film. It is bland and unrealistic. I would not even suggest this film to my worst enemy. Do not watch this film. So here's my thing with this. What is the thing that Donkey Braids saw in the film, that the certain scene that he or she saw that revealed the plot twist? What do you think it is? I think I have a pretty, I mean, my guess is it's the thing about they were theater actors.
I don't know, because what plot twist is, like, there were so many plot twists.
I think they're talking about the main plot twist at the end with
they certainly mean that,
where
right?
she was Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia is Elvira. So what reveals that so strongly that it ruins the film? And I think, by the way, I did not put it together, but I think that the thing, you know, when you see the picture of the two of them on the wall in some sort of theatrical role, like you're supposed to immediately, I don't know that you're supposed to, but I think you could immediately go, Garrido is not who he seems to be. His wife is not who she seems to be.
When she turns off his phone.
You don't see her turn it off, though.
Oh, I don't know.
The only thing I can think, I want to look up what's on the suitcase.
I will say, though, I especially love this review because I kid you guys not, I could not be more serious about this. This is exactly how my brother talks. like the it deserves a -1. It deserves less than a -1. Like I can imagine him just saying that. I love this. It's awesome.
I think they're wrong. Like I kind of think your brother's like not right entirely. Like I get what he's saying and I get what this author is saying, but I do.
No, I'm not saying that he would rate it like this. I'm just saying he talks like that.
Okay, got it. I mean, I think that this is too extreme a response. Like, I think this is somebody who doesn't like this genre to begin with, or, you know, there's some kind of disconnect here, because I think this film does do what it accomplishes exactly what it sets out to do. I think it's frankly a B grade version of that. So it's not like it's simply not a stellar version of the thing it's trying to do, but it's an okay version. And if you're just getting into this genre, then I think it's a perfectly fine way in.
Mm-hmm.
I also think a good start to Spanish films rather than like just this genre. It's like, okay, you want to get into Spanish films, start with this one. It's pretty bad, but it's watchable.
Well, the problem there is that there's so much great Spanish film that, so you're right. So I think this is like I think that I would want to compare it to just a middle of the road Hollywood film with sort of standard actors, like nothing that's like sort of leaping out at you as like a great film, like just an average Hollywood film that'll probably be forgotten 30 or 40 years from now. That's kind of where we're at with this film. But again, like that doesn't mean that it's not worth watching.
Mm.
Well, and I think that gets back to what we were talking about before, where like you have to think about why you're watching a film. Like if you're just watching it to be entertained, I don't know, like I feel like it was entertaining. Like sure,
Yeah.
maybe it was predictable if you figured it out, but like it was still fun. And like I like bad movies just because they're fun to watch. Like I really unironically enjoy watching Twilight because I think it's funny and that like I don't know, like and I know that it's a bad movie, but I'm still entertained by it. I wouldn't say that like just because it's bad that it deserves less than a -1. Like that's just I don't know. Like why do you have to rip on it like that? People think it's fun, you
It
know?
also makes movies a matter of life and death, and they're just not.
Yeah. I think a person like that is literally just watching the movie to find something bad
But they
about it
hate, yes.
rather
A lot
than
of people do that.
seeing the good in the movie. It's like, I thought the movie was bad, but I didn't think it was that bad. I was like, okay, there's good parts to this movie. I can still enjoy certain scenes of this movie. I wouldn't say the entire movie is bad, but it's like, it's not the best that I've seen.
I think that's definitely a personality thing. Like Amanda, your ability to say that, a lot of people, it's just a personality thing. Do you know, like some people just have personalities that, and not that it's a bad thing, but some people just have personalities that don't gear that way, that don't think that way. So I don't know. I feel like that's my go-to with every um audience or viewer for a movie. It genuinely does depend on who you are as a person. Like how you watch movies can be one thing, but that can be the same as the person next to you, you know? So
I feel like that flows right into my quote, which is, although predictable at times, The Invisible Guest has enough twists and turns to keep you captivated until the truth is revealed. And I got that from a Rotten Tomatoes, and I just tagged the actual link to the article that it's from. But I think that they kind of knew exactly what I was thinking. You know, when they wrote that exact sentence, I was like, okay, I thought this entire movie was predictable, but it's the ending that like kind of gave it a nice twist and turn to be like, okay, yeah, there's something special about this specific movie. You know, it's not just a predictable movie till the very end. There's a little like golden nugget in it.
I chose my quote because it's simply exactly what I told people when I told them to watch this, which was, I won't explain anything. It would be a waste of my time. My only review is this: watch this movie right now. And I think you guys can attest to that on how I approached you guys with this movie. And so I don't know. I just think that it was only appropriate for me to choose that quote because it's basically me. So.
It's funny. Do you think anybody ever, I mean, we took that advice and we watched it and are discussing it, but don't you get the sense that when you tell somebody in the most emphatic terms that you must absolutely positively watch this film, they'll just never do it?
All the time. Are you kidding me?
I tell students all the time,
Oh my
you got to watch Zodiac. Zodiac is like top 10. It's one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life. You must watch it. And nobody ever watches it. Never.
No,
They
I
just
think that's
don't.
totally a
You're
thing.
missing
That's
out.
me. That
You're
happens to me
missing
all the
out.
time. And I'm fine. I mean, that's the thing is like at some point, and I'm sure you feel the same way, man. And if you're in the same boat as me, at some point, you don't really care. You still say it, you know?
Well, the
Like,
problem I have is people ask me at like dinner parties, like, well, what have you seen good recently that you really like that I should watch? And then I'll tell them and they watch it. And then they come back at the next dinner party and tell me they hated it. So it's just, you damned if you do, damned if you don't, you know?
that's true.
Mine was from the Hollywood Reporter. I was bummed. I really wanted to find a Spanish article and get their opinions, but then I don't remember enough Spanish, so that was never going to
Yeah, I
happen.
found that too. I was looking, I was like, okay, this is a great Spanish article. Then I look at it and I'm like, I only know French. What
But anyway, so it says Paolo may indeed be incidentally interested in themes such as the shifting truth, justice, and the way arrogant, powerful people react to losing control of their lives, but he's far more interested in keeping the viewer engaged and breathless. This he does very well indeed, but in the trickiest of films, psychological depth is as invisible as the titular guest. And I just feel like I resonated with that because I definitely agree that it does keep you on your toes and it keeps you watching and trying to figure out where it's going. But I feel like there was so much potential for really like diving into Adrian's character and kind of like like Adrian and Laura are kind of messed up. Like he's this powerful rich person, and he literally kills a kid and kills her and does all this terrible stuff to keep his reputation in check. And I feel like they almost got there, but I feel like you could easily watch it and just have that all go right over your head.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Laura's like a really interesting character, a great femme fatale, but you have no idea where it's coming from. It's like, who hurt you? Why are you acting this way? Like
Well, another thing I think it's important to recognize is, I thought of this because I just recently finished Netflix's first German show, Dark, and I highly recommend. But whenever you watch a TV show or a movie that's where you need subtitles, it's so different. Like your experience, like when I watch a Korean movie or when I watch a Korean TV show, when I read the subtitles, 10 times out of 10, I'm like, that's not what that means.
Yeah.
That's not what they're trying to convey. And I think it's a culture thing too, because with certain sayings and expressions, obviously things vary from culture to culture. And even with the German show in this movie, it changes the way that you perceive the movie when you actually understand the language.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if nothing else, the whole contratiempo thing, like I
yes.
kept picking up because I took Spanish all through high school. And so like I can like somewhat listen to them without reading the subtitles, like kind of, but I'm
Yeah.
still reading them. And so I would notice when they would say things that wouldn't quite translate over, and I would be like, oh, but like in the original language, that makes so much sense. And that's like a
Mhm.
really important choice of words. And you just can't always, and that's why I never ever watch like the English dubs of Spanish shows. Like it's always better to watch the original
Mhm.
sound with subtitles, because otherwise it's terrible. It loses all of its integrity.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely something to that. Like we can't get the experience that a Spanish speaking person would get when they watch this film.
I can tell Jordana when you said English dub, the anime just like came to mind because my brother watches anime.
Because English dubs, they just ruin everything, especially if you're not getting a good voice actor that like resembles a similar voice to that actual character. I'm like, okay, but that's not what you sound like. That's not what you're supposed to sound like.
I'm a dub defender.
I'm a
Wow,
dub defender.
really?
But when it comes to animation, not live action. If you watch a live action with a dub, you're watching. It feels like you're watching a parody.
Yeah, it's psychotic. Like I can't
Psychotic.
fathom doing it.
But with anime, I think it's better. You can watch it either way. There's nothing wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with dubs. I watch both because I want to enjoy the art and not have to read. And
Now that I think about it, I don't really watch anime, but I've been watching Studio Ghibli movies this whole break, which I don't know. I mean, it's an animated movie. I don't think it counts as anime, but I accidentally was watching all of the English versions because I don't know, like I'm assuming there's original actors that are like speaking Japanese and not, but on HBO Max, it's all English. And I don't know, I never really thought about, usually I hate dubs.
Max. You can listen to the Japanese version if you just click English in the bottom corner. I watch them all too on HBO Max. And I grew up listening to the English dubs of like Ponyo and stuff like that. So it's like if I start the English dub for it, I'll continue with that forever. Especially Ponyo, because you got Frankie Jonas, you have Betty White, you have all the gods in this one movie.
My dad is one of the biggest Spirited Away fans, okay? And I remember it was one of the first films he ever had me watch once I was old enough to comprehend what was going on. And the first thing he said, he was like, if you're my daughter, you sure as hell better not watch the English dub version. He was like, I don't care if you can't read yet. You're gonna watch the original. I couldn't read, okay? Like I didn't know what was going on. And he was like, you're gonna watch it. I don't care. I watched Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, obviously My Neighbor Totoro, and Princess Mononoke without knowing what was going on. And I will say, now that I'm old enough now, no regrets. I'm very grateful for that. But
watching the Japanese versions does make it better, especially when you like hear the similarities.
Yeah.
Like, the words that they're saying and the names. And like especially in Spirited Away with Haku, I was like, okay, this is all connecting.
Three, two,
Two.
what? That's awesome.
Great.
All right. Thank you
love
so
it.
much, Manon, for joining us and taking
that was a lot of
Before
fun.
you leave, was it great?
Oh, so how do you rate them? I'd give it about a 6 or maybe a 7, something like that. I don't think it's good. I definitely don't think it's great. I think it's good.
I agree. I'd probably give it a 75 or an 80
Oh, I was like out of 10.
out of 100. Out of 100.
I would give it a 7 out of 10. Good with potential, but just shy of great.
I gotta give it an 8 out of 10 just because I recommended the movie and stick by my guns. So I'm gonna give it an 8.
I give it a 6. I liked it for what it was, but what it was could have been better.
It's like a B paper. It's like it had the potential.
We all know what that means too. So we're on the same page.
It's like it had the works, but it just didn't surprise us. You know, it wasn't anything
The
new.
cohesiveness. Yes. All right. Thanks again, Manon.
Bet. All
Will you
right.
be with us on our next one, or is it just this one around?
I think it's just this one.
Okay.
But
You're just our special guest, but you're welcome anytime.
invite me back
Yes.
later and I'll do it for sure.
All right.
Right.
All right. See you
Sounds
later.
good. Bye.
Bye.